So, if you're into Doctor Who, obviously there's the show, Modern Era and Classic, plenty to chew on there. But if you want more stuff, well, there's a number of places to go. There's novels, novelizations of episodes, comic books, but most fans turn to Big Finish, the audio dramas which feature all manner of characters and returning cast members from all eras of the show. And I had the joy of getting to speak with Jason Haigh-Ellery, who is the managing director over at Big Finish. Now, there's a bit of a lengthy conversation. We go over a lot of stuff, including the history of the company, the history of its relationship with Doctor Who in particular, and a number of other tangents along the way. There is going to be an instance towards the back end, latter half of the video, where it is going to suddenly drop in with a later conversation that he and I had, basically because we realized there was an element that we had missed in a specific topic that's going to come up. So just be aware that that's coming. Otherwise, enjoy. So, Jason, thank you so much for coming on, and actually, I was going to say agreeing to, suggesting that you come on to talk.
I was just saying just now that I used to watch you on YouTube, and I think your videos are excellent about the series, but also about Big Finish, which is obviously lovely. And it was a bit of a surprise to see you at Gallifrey. I don't know why it was a surprise, but I saw you and went, oh, it's that person from Council of Geek,
It is funny, like there's the people like in the program, you're like, oh, I know that, like I'll see these people, but then there's the people you just run into wandering around like, oh, I had that as well with both creative people and like people I follow on TikTok and all this other stuff, but it still throws you off, even though you're all there for the same reason.
It's weird, isn't it? It's just by virtue of the fact you're in a small frame. When you meet them like face to face, it just feels totally different, doesn't it?
It really does. So for those viewers who may not know, if you don't mind sort of giving your current position within Big Finish and like just a quick overview of your history within the company.
So my name is Jason Haigh-Ellery. I am the chairman and co-executive producer of Big Finish. And I started the company in around about 94. And in 1998, we moved into audio drama, which we did originally with Bernice Summerfield. And then we got the license to do Doctor Who in early 1999. And in fact, I went to the Gallifrey convention in 1999. And they were like, oh, there's no new Doctor Who. There's nothing here. Where are we going? Will it ever come back in any way? And we were sitting there going, because we knew, but we couldn't tell anyone that we got the license. And so there was a lot of knowing looks between us all. And then we brought back Doctor Who with Sirens of Time, starring Peter Davison, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy, who were the three doctors that we knew at the time. And what era is your Doctor Who era when you started watching Doctor Who?
So I came in, I got hooked in by Tennant. But then once I saw that, I went back to the start of series 1 with Eccleston and caught up. I've been watching the show as it airs since series 4. That's where I came into things. And I've obviously gone back and I've taken in as much classic as I have the time for, because there's a lot of it, and dipped into things like Big Finish. But that's where I came in.
Right. So I go back to Pertwee was my first Doctor. And it was one of my biggest regrets is the fact that unfortunately we didn't start fast enough to work with Pertwee, because that would have been amazing. And I talked to Elizabeth Sladen about this when we were doing the Sarah Jane Smith adventures that we did. Elizabeth said, oh, John would have been banging your door down to do these because he loved playing the part so much. I was a teenager when Peter Davison was the Doctor, and I really appreciated his Doctor because he was not in. It felt like he wasn't that much older than me in some respects, so he really appealed to me as a Doctor. I understand how Matt Smith especially had a lot of support amongst the fans because a lot of the fans were of a similar age in some respects. But anyway,
I actually had that same thing. Part of the reason why I took to him so much was he and I are basically the same age. So that was the point. I'm like, oh, it's like I could be the Doctor.
well, you actually look a lot younger, may I just say.
Thank you.
But yes, it is that aspect, isn't it? So when we got back with Signs of Time, Peter was very exciting for me. Colin, I'd got into fandom a lot by the time Colin was the Doctor, and then Sylvester was again fandom. So it was very exciting to get the three of them back to do that first story. There's a photograph which is on the net of me and Gary Russell and Nick and oh God, it's come out of my head. Anyway, another person. That's terrible. It will come back to me in a moment. And we're all drinking champagne and celebrating the fact we got the Doctors back into the studio. And we took, and I think they must have been a bit like, what the hell's going on, when we got them in there and we were recording, because we were so excited. It was like giving a load of kids Smarties before we sat down to do the recording. And then it progressed from there. We originally were going to do 6 productions a year for 3 years. And we felt that if we did 18 productions, then that would be an achievement and something that was a bit of a legacy for us. And we would have done our bit for Doctor Who, if you see what I mean. The irony now, of course, is that that's basically what we release every month. So it's a bit like that. And within, I think it was within 3 months of us launching, I had to contact Gary and say, you know how you're doing this as a part-time job? It's not a part-time job. And secondly, you know how we're going to do one every 2 months? It has to be monthly. And then we went from, so about 10 productions in the first year to 15 in the second year, because we brought in Dalek Empire as well. Nick wanted to do something with Daleks, and it was an opportunity to do something a bit different. And then it progressed from there. I think one of the criticisms which is given to Big Finish is that we produce too much. And there's a slight reason for this. It's because we keep on getting overexcited. Because we are at the core of it, we're all fans, and we love to produce this stuff. And we want to have, we want to hear these stories ourselves, basically. There is a lot of wish fulfillment within that. I mean, a very good example of this is Doctor of War. I'll tell you where that came from. It was cribbed from, you know, in the Twice Upon a Time episode, when they are reviewing the Doctor's life, it ends up with them saying Doctor of War.
He is the Doctor of War.
And I thought, oh, that's a nice twist on the War Doctor. And I thought, well, that goes into an Unbound. And I thought, I want to see that. I want to listen to that production. And that's where that all came from. So most of what we do comes from the fact that we are massive fans and we're doing stuff that we want to listen to ourselves.
Coming off Doctor Who for just a hot second,
Yeah, sure.
I want to ask, because I feel like this, I suspect the answer to this is going to vary from license to license, because I know you do produce things that are outside of Doctor Who as well. Yeah. When you acquire these licenses, I know that there are restrictions in terms of what characters or whatever that you are or aren't allowed to use.
Yes.
But within that framework, how much creative freedom is Big Finish granted? Do you have to actually run story beats by the license holder, or once you clear what aspects you can use, you basically just get to do what you want?
There has been a change over the years. When we started 20 odd years ago, to be honest with you, no one really cared about what we do. Now with every licensee, they want to see everything because it's all about brand. And the word brand didn't exist 22, 23 years ago. And having a head of brand and a brand management is a very good thing, because it means that everything is orchestrated. Things don't happen at the same time. People don't tread on each other's toes. You don't contradict each other. It's a good idea. But it means that now pretty much everything we do is run past the licensor. So we would create a storyline that would go. We'd go through scripts, etc., etc. We're trusted because we've done this for so long and we know the properties. So there's, it's not a question of trust. It's just so that everything is coordinated and everything is in tune with itself. If you see what I mean, that's probably explaining it badly, but
no, that tracks. So that's a thing that has been changing and evolving as sort of just the landscape of how these licenses are even handled at all has changed.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, originally there was very little done because when we got the Doctor Who license, for example, in '99, it was a little bit of a dead show. Obviously, Russell had other ideas, and it's fantastic that he's coming back. But suddenly it became far more important, and understandably, everyone needed to see storylines. And the example I always give is that we had a storyline with Queen Victoria. We presented at the same time as they were doing season 1, and we were asked not to do Queen Victoria, and we went, oh, okay. And we saw season 1, and Queen Victoria wasn't there, but it was in season 2. But Russell already had that in mind. He had the first 2 seasons already mapped out in his head. So yeah, that's so sometimes we are asked, very rarely we're asked not to do something for a bit. Other times we're actually told what might be happening so that we can coordinate properly on it, if you see what I mean. And I can't really give you an example of that.
No, I wouldn't expect that you could.
But it's quite interactive, and it's great that we have a number of people, and not just Doctor Who, as you quite rightly say, things like the Avengers, for example, the people we work with on that, they're lovely, and they really love that we're doing the audio productions because it brings alive a lot of stuff they don't have, because they had, similar to Doctor Who, they had so many of their episodes wiped, that this is a way of bringing them alive again. And also really love working with the Dark Shadows people. They've been fantastic. Not just the actors, but also the guys who look after the estate as well. Great stuff. And similar with Blake Seven, the Terry Nation estate really love the fact that new productions are being made of their father's work, basically. It sort of keeps them alive a little bit.
So I know you always get asked, have you guys ever considered X license or this or that? And you mentioned at the Gallifrey panel that the answer is probably yes, but for whatever reason, you couldn't get it. So what I want to ask instead is, if we just remove every logistical barrier and you could just have whatever you wanted, what would your dream license be that you have not already done?
Here we go. Right. If there was no restrictions and no negotiating, I could just pick like that, then Star Wars, Star Trek, James Bond, Battlestar Galactica, Farscape, Labyrinth, Terminator, Blade Runner, Dune, Lord of the Rings. You may have noticed I'm a geek.
Maybe a little bit. I love the fact that you not only had an answer, you had a full list ready to go. And can I just say, I'm
not telling you which ones of those you can see the ones we're not doing, obviously, but I can't tell you which ones we've contacted in the past. But
well, you've also saved me a follow-up question, but just by mentioning Farscape on your own, because having recently done my rewatch of that for the podcast I do with Jesse Gender, that one's been on my mind a little bit.
Well, it's a bloody good series, actually.
Oh, it really is.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you some specific things about some of the specific decisions and directions that have gone on with Big Finish.
Okay.
And sort of starting with something that I had addressed not all that long ago in a video. So the recasting of voices and of doctors. So I guess I just want to start in the broad sense. What kind of conversations were going on when you at the very beginning first started doing that? Was that something that there was a reluctance to do, or was there an eagerness to find a way to bring back characters whose actors had passed?
Well, if we go back, let's go back to the beginning of Big Finish. we had access to 3 doctors to start with. As I said, Peter, Colin, Sylvester. We very quickly, once we got Siren of the Time in, and I was able to show Paul McGann what we were trying to do, I sent Paul McGann that and also a script for something we hadn't produced yet, which I think was Holy Terror. I want to say we had the script, which Rob Sherman, because we even then we just read it and went, "This is a bloody good script."
That's still my favorite one, for the record.
Oh, really? There you go. We hit our stride nice and early, didn't we? Not saying that stuff we've done recently isn't good stories, but we sent that script and Sirens to Paul's agent. They listened to it and went, "Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, great. Yeah, right." And then the thing that came back was that Paul was filming Hornblower at that time, and he had 2 young kids, one of which now works for us. That's how long ago it is. See that? There we go. It's ridiculous, isn't it? So I remember Jake playing. They had table football, or fuzzball, as you would call them over there, and I used to play fuzzball with him when he was like 9, and he now works for us. That is ridiculous. But he Paul said, "Look, I've got young kids. I'm doing Hornblower all the time. If you I'll do it if we record in Bristol, where my kids are." So we all went up there, and we used to record 4 double discs back to back up there. And for season 2, we did 6, I think. And then we went back to 4 again because it was so time consuming to do that. So coming back to your question, when we started, Paul McGann, we had objectives. We had the 3 doctors we already knew. Paul McGann came on board, loved it, been there ever since. Then we managed to work away at Tom. And we got Tom about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And then we started to think, where do we go now? The Unbound range was a way of testing the waters about recasting the Doctor, as it were, in terms of putting new actors in the part. And when the television series came back, they said, we would prefer it if you didn't recast the Doctor again, because obviously it gets into the press and they become press news items that someone's leaving because this person has been cast as the Doctor, when in fact what they've been asked to do is an Unbound for the big finish. So you can see how that becomes a little bit complicated. So we had kept with one of the Unbound Doctors in David Warner, because he'd already played the part, so we could come back to him, and we played that. And then basically we worked with an actor called Tim Treloar. Tim Treloar was cast in the Tom Baker story, and Nick and Tom were talking during lunch and went, "I'm sure he reminds me of, I've met him before, or he reminds me of someone." And they were chatting away, and then Tom went, "It's John Pertwee." And he went, "Oh my God." It wasn't exactly like Pertwee, but there was a lot of Pertwee there, just naturally, just the way he speaks. So we tested the water. And I think for a lot of people, the sales were not great to start with. I think there was a lot of resistance to recasting. But there was a lot of stories we couldn't tell without having a third Doctor, for example. The key moment, though, for Tim was doing Legacy of Time, because it was all one box set with all the Doctors in it. Tim had his own disc, and a lot of people who hadn't heard Tim do the third Doctor suddenly found him. And in the 6 months after Legacy came out, Tim's sales went like that, because it was a lot of people like, "I'm not doing that. I'm not." "Oh, yeah, I'll give it a go." So there was a lot of that going on. And that led us to think, when we were restructuring, because the reason why the main range came to an end is that the sales were doing that and box sets were doing this.
That was actually going to be something I was going to ask, as to whether the ending of the monthly range and the focus on box sets was like a business necessity, or whether that was more of a creative decision. And it sounds like it may have been a mix, but it sounds like it's leaning towards the former there.
I think to be honest with you, everyone liked working on the box sets more because you've got to tell a wider story. So it wasn't just financial. But when I said, look, the guys, the box sets are doing this and these are doing this, everyone went, to be honest with you, we'd much rather do the box sets. So it became okay, this is slightly pushing an open door. Once we did the third Doctor, it did make sense to do the first and second. And part of the impetus on that was by virtue of the fact, if we stop doing the main range, and there was a lot of push to do it before 275, it just mentally, I thought 275 it isn't a round number at all, but it is a round number, if you see what I mean, in my head. Obviously a rounder number is 300, but we would have had to go on for another 2 years to do that. When we finished the main range, what it meant was those 3 Doctors who had been inhabiting the main range were inverted commas free, and it became more obvious that we could do box sets for each individual Doctor. And at that point, David Bradley is fantastic. He's just never available because he's one of the most working actors. We love working with him. In no way are we stopping working with David Bradley. And we've said that, but I was asked so many times at Gallifrey about, you're not dropping David Bradley, and the answer is no, we're not. In fact, we're planning something with him at the moment. It's his availability. And that's great, but he will always make time for us because he loves playing the Doctor. But it made sense that if we were going to cast a new actor to play the second Doctor, and Michael made it very clear to us that he wanted to do it, Michael Troughton, it would mean that we would have our Doctors for all these ones, but not the first. So getting in a new first Doctor made sense. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the first Doctor is probably the most recast Doctor in history. You've got 5 Doctors, you've got David Bradley's interpretation, arguably you've got Peter Cushing as well as another version of the first Doctor. And then we've got our version of the first Doctor. There's been a lot of actors play the first Doctor, but I've gone on record to say Tim Treloar will not be the last actor to play the third Doctor. And I should underline, as I did when we were chatting at Gallifrey, that these are not people doing impersonations. They are very good actors. Tim's an RSC actor who has a voice which sounds similar to the third Doctor, and he leans into that, and he is acting. He's not impersonating. So they bring their own character traits to it, and that's a development. In the same way that Bradley did, he's not mimicking Hartnell, he's bringing some of the attributes of the first Doctor into his performance as the first Doctor.
I want to ask a little bit about some possible unforeseen consequences of bringing in as many new actors to play old characters, because we have gotten to the point where you now have a release like The Annihilators, which has the second Doctor, the third Doctor, the Brigadier, Liz Shaw, and Jamie McCrimmon, and only one of those 5 is voiced by the original actor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel that the sort of the breaking of that seal and starting to do that has possibly led to a diminishment in more long-term original characters, like a lot of the original companions that used to be introduced or things like that, because now you suddenly have access to stuff that it makes creating new things almost redundant?
You have hit a nail on the head that I didn't even know was sticking out of the wall. That's very interesting. I will bring this up with everyone else, Vera, because I hadn't even thought of that, but you're absolutely right. And we have a problem with Big Finish companions in that we fall in love with them. As you may have noticed, Charlie, the original intention was for Charlie to die in Zagreus, and we couldn't pull the trigger. Because if you think about it, that character was built up to die, and it never happened because we love India Fisher. At Gallifrey, actually, as you may have noticed, very embarrassingly, India and I got slightly drunk in the bar on Saturday night because we hadn't seen each other in a number of years. And we were just in each other's company, and she is the most lovely woman. And, you know, we just couldn't pull the trigger. Similar things sort of started to happen with Sheridan as Lucy Miller. But what happened there was Sheridan suddenly became one of the most successful actresses in the UK, won BAFTAs, won Olivier Awards, and it got to the point where she was taking bikes, courier bikes, from set to our studios to record for a few hours, get back on the bike and get back on set. And they were having to release her from films and television shows to come and record with us. And it got to the point where it's like, oh my God, this is becoming a nightmare for her and for us. And so we thought, you know what? We're looking at the character, and it would have a massive impact if she died at the end. Big spoiler, if you haven't heard all the Lucy Miller stuff, you should have by now. It's been out forever. But she dies. And it's one of the most devastating things we've ever done in the studio, because India talks about it, but all companions do it. I can guarantee it. Phil Olivier did it as well. Is that you flip through and go, just checking, and I'm still alive. Fine. and Sheridan did this all the time because she could see which way this was going, and she'd flip through and go. And then one day she flipped through and went, "Oh, I've died." So she came into the studio like this, and we were like, "Hello." She was like, "I don't want to go," and it's like, I know. And we sat down. Nick and I sat down with her on this little bench outside, and we gave her a hug, and we were like, "You're amazing." Nick actually said one of the most perceptive things that Nick ever said about anything. He's not a very perceptive guy, you see, but no, he is. One of the most perceptive things he ever said was, at some point, everyone else is going to figure out how brilliant Sheridan is, and then we're screwed. And that's pretty much what happened. It took them 4 years, but it happened. We gave her a great big hug and told her how much we loved her, and she went in there and gave an amazing performance. And Paul McGann gave an amazing performance as well. If you remember the bit at the end where he's talking to the recorder, he's listening to her and then speaking to her, and she's gone, but he's listening to her voice. He gave an amazing performance, and we were like, "Wow, okay, everyone, let's go down the pub." And he went, "No, I can do it better than that." And I was like, "Right, okay." So he went again, and he was even better, because it meant so much to him, because Sheridan, he had got on so well. He'd done a TV show with her when she was 16. And when we said, "Oh, your new companion is going to be Sheridan Smith," he was like, "Brilliant, I love her." And he just loved working with her. And when she came back, it was just like old times when she came back for the special Further Adventures box set we did. It was great to have him back. So here's the thing. We fall in love with our original creations, and then we don't let them go. And the thing about Doctor Who is, historically, you have a companion or a new companion every 1, 2, 3 seasons. That is one of the ways the series keeps on being fresh. I was talking to Phil Olivier about this, and Phil was on Brookside for years, which is a soap over in the UK. And he says, "You do realize I've been working for Big Finish more than half my life, and it's the longest gig I've ever done." And it's like, yeah, fair enough. So one of the things that we haven't done is that we haven't created new companions in a while who were original. But what we have done is we brought to life again companions who may not be with us anymore, and to create eras that we didn't have access to before because we didn't have the actors available, if you see what I mean. So I think that has been a phase, but it is something like, which, you know what, you pointed it out, you're absolutely right. And I hadn't really thought about it enough, that we haven't been creating any new companions. So maybe we'll have to sit down and make a new companion.
I'll happily take a co-creation and credit on that. So like, first of all, I just want to make the observation. So I feel like what you said about falling in love with Charlie and intending to kill her and then not, probably as a result of that, you probably have more sympathy for Stephen Moffat's inability to let Clara stay dead than I do as a result of that.
I totally get that 110%.
So I'm gonna actually kind of branch off about what we were just talking about with it's not a direct thing, but I think it does have impact on sort of the next thing I want to talk about, which is some of the representation that is present for minority groups within the range that you do. And the way it's connected is that obviously if you're dipping into existing characters, they already are what they are.
Yes.
Now, through the admittedly somewhat rushed research that I was able to do, it does look like LGBTQ plus characters started getting introduced about a decade ago. We had characters like Oliver Harper, or who's non-binary on Torchwood. There was Calypso Jones just a couple years ago, who was a non-binary character played by a non-binary actor. I was very happy to see that. But I did notice, and this was just kind of based off of like looking at the covers of the range. Doctor Who especially is very monochrome. There's an awful lot of white people. Torchwood seems to have a little bit more racial diversity. But I wonder if with that or something like disability representation is part of the reason that we don't have as much of that in Big Finish, because those are things that are easier to signify visually than through audio, or is that just something that hasn't even been actively thought about and is just an accidental byproduct?
No, we have thought about it a lot, actually. We are casting a lot more people of color, and also, you know, it's more about getting in people who are really good at the job.
Oh, and, yeah, of course, I mean, always.
We've recently taken on a new producer, Dom, who is bloody fantastic and actually is saving our lives on a number of things. And it's important to get new young voices in, and also different cultural voices as well. And we're very actively doing that. The worst thing that could happen is that I, as a 54-year-old white male who's middle class, suddenly start saying we need to be hip and cool and bring in all these people just for the sake of it. It's got to be for good reasons, and they've got to do a good job. And we've been finding a lot of very good people who can do that. And when it comes to diversity of casting, that is happening a lot. You know, we've been very lucky in finding someone like Rebecca Root, who brings so much to the character and a lot of life experience, which is transformed within the character. We do work with non-binary actors. The television series, which I've just sent you the trailer for, as you will see, is actually created by a 17-year-old teenage girl and her non-binary best mate. What was so important about it was that it was giving me insights into areas which I didn't really know about. And because it was co-created by someone who's non-binary, it taught me a lot about their lives and how they feel about a number of different issues. So I think it's a very important piece, and I was very happy to have got it produced. It's something that we actively look for, is good creatives who can give us a different perspective on life.
Which is great. Because I'm gonna get annoyed with myself if I don't.
Okay.
I want to push back on one little thing about one specific bit of wording that you said.
Yes.
And I'm just going to caution you about this mindset.
Okay.
So there was a point in your answer where you said, you know, we want to be sure that we're bringing these people in, you know, for the right reasons and for good reason, or something very close to that.
Yeah.
Be cautious of that mindset, because that is not a requirement to bring in a straight white character. Nobody says there has to be a good reason to bring in a white character or a able-bodied character or a straight cis het character. They only ever say that there should be a good reason to do anything other than that. So just be cautious of the mindset. We're going to drop this in just real quick as an insert, because we kind of like realize some stuff about the conversation in terms of having more minority performers. And in specific, there was something that I simply didn't realize in terms of how things differ in the UK versus the US that was actually really helpful for me to hear from you.
I'm actually going to quote from real figures because I knew there was a big disparity in the percentage of how the population is made up in the US against the UK. So I did some research, and in the US, you have 57% are white. In the UK, only 3.3% of the population is black. One of the things that I know I've spoken to both Arts Ed, and Mount View, which are two very leading colleges for both actors and creatives in the UK. And they pull through a lot of very good actors, a lot of good directors, and a lot of good producers. And I've done some lecturing there, both at Arts Ed and at Mount View. And both of them are committed to bringing forward more Black and Asian talent into acting, producing, and directing. One of the biggest problems we have is that even though it's only 3.3% are Black in the UK, Black actors are underrepresented in the mix of the total number of actors in the UK. So it's actually less than 3% of actors are Black.
And then, of course, there's the fact that that's just working on a much smaller pool, and then you still have to audition and find someone who's actually going to work for the part.
There's only 70,000 actors in the UK. So if less than 3% are Black, that means there's 2,000 actors in the UK who are available, who are Black. Now, there is this issue, which is that not every actor is brilliant. You have the most amazing actors, and you have actors who are not quite as good. And obviously, you want to cast the best actors for the best parts. So if, for example, you say that across the board, 50% of actors are less good than the other 50% of actors, you get into a situation where there are, your pool is even smaller, if you see what I mean, if you want to cast really good actors in really good roles. Now, because the percentage is so small as well, I was looking at some figures from the British Film Institute earlier, and they were showing that 59% of movies made in the UK have no Black actors in at all. Now, obviously, that is something which everyone is working to change. And within Big Finish, we have made a number of strides in the last few years of introducing more and more Black, Asian, transgender, and differently abled actors. So, for example, recently we cast Ruth Madeley, who's a wheelchair user, as the first Doctor Who companion who uses a wheelchair, which is going to be very interesting as we go forward, storytelling-wise. We've also brought back Brigadier Bambera, for example, Angela Bruce, which has been amazing. I can't wait for people to hear what she delivers, because she has loved coming back to the part so much. If there was a criticism in the past, maybe we weren't thinking enough about being as inclusive as we should have been. But I think in the last 5 years, we've done a lot of work to try and improve that and to bring more and more good Black actors into our series. But not just that, it's also Asian actors as well. There is a disparity in the number of Asian actors available, and it's worse than Black actors. Although the population in the UK is about 7% Asian, it's very underrepresented in the number of Asian actors available to us. And I think that's an area which we can improve. We should be having more Asian actors working with us.
Well, I think the reason I really wanted to get this added into the conversation we'd already had is there was a little bit, and we didn't realize it until after the interview, that there was kind of a fundamental disconnect, because you had an inherent understanding of UK demographics, whereas the vast majority of times whenever I'm looking at representation, I'm looking at Hollywood productions, which is a completely different ballgame between how much bigger the US is, how much different the demographics are and how diverse the population of a place like Los Angeles, where a lot of the core, Los Angeles and New York, where a lot of the core casting is. So I'd gotten very used to being very dismissive of anything that sounded like an excuse to not look into minority actors, because the demographic realities where I live are such that it comes across much more as an excuse versus very different demographic realities in the UK, which I frankly had never thought to take into account.
It's very interesting, isn't it? And I'm very glad to have this conversation with you, because if, for example, we were given 20 auditions on audio and we didn't know the ethnicity of anyone that had auditioned for us, there is such a small pool of Black actors. The chances are that if we were just sent through 20 auditions, all 20 of them would be white. The chances are it's very easy for us to cast all white casting, if you see what I mean. We actually have to actively work to make sure we're representative. And one of the key factors here is actually the one which you've picked up on, which is that we're producing not just for the UK, but for the world. And it's very important that we actually represent a world view, not just a UK view. And I think we've been working far more towards that in the last few years. And we have some really exciting casting that's coming up. And I can't tell you what it is because it's embargoed at the moment. But you're going to be thrilled when it happens.
I'm sure that I will be. And I don't think there's too much more to add beyond what we've said, but I really wanted to get this in there because I try and be as accounting for the logistical realities of any production that I bring up representation in as I can. And this was frankly just a reality that I hadn't formed a proper picture of in my head. So it's something that I really appreciate you elaborating on. And it gives me, I think, a better understanding when I talk about UK productions. Not to say that I won't encourage more organizations to do what you are appearing to do, which is to make more of a concerted effort, but understanding that it does take more deliberate effort, whereas in the US, you almost have to go out of your way to cast
the same example, as you say, in Los Angeles, if you put out a general casting call, probably 40% of the actors coming in would be Black. So it would be very
black, Hispanic, something other than white, certainly.
So it's just a slightly different. It means that we have to be more proactive, basically. But it's something that we really, really passionately believe in. I think if you look at some of the casting we've done in the last few years, you can see which way we're going. And also the casting of Rebecca Root, for example, as the first transgender companion, I think is an important step as well to make this a more inclusive world in Doctor Who.
Certainly appreciative of that. So thank you. One of the things somewhat related to this that you don't actually even have to comment on this if you're not comfortable doing so. But I do just want to point out my own personal appreciation with James Dreyfus after he made his statements in regards to his feelings about the transgender community, that he did not continue to be employed there. And again, if you do or don't want to speak on that, but I do have an appreciation of that, because it's become an issue in many areas where performers or writers will say these things and the people employing them won't appreciate that. Continuing to employ them after that is at the very least saying that this is okay and we don't have a problem with it.
James came along, did his contract, and that's probably all I can say about that. As you'd probably appreciate.
And that's the way these things tend to be. They always get reported as like person fired, wherein the legal reality is person contract not renewed, which is not actually the same thing. We are sort of coming towards the tail end of our time. So I wanted to ask you and this might be hard to pick one thing, I'll let you pick multiple. With everything that you've done, with everything that Big Finish has accomplished or is working on, is there something that stands out as an aspect, be it a specific story, a character, or working with a certain actor? What are you most proud at having helped bring about?
Now that's very interesting because it's a very broad canvas which I've worked in.
It is. I've given you a lot of options, and if you're anything like me, you get paralyzed by choice. So
yeah, that you've just done that to me. However, what I would say is, I think it's. I'll tell you what. I found it. Okay, I have found it. Working with Terrance Dicks. So when I grew up, we didn't have repeats on television. We didn't have videos available to us. We didn't have DVDs, whatever. We had the books. So I was an avid reader of Terrance Dicks's books. And for me, reading those books was time traveling and going back and discovering adventures which I didn't know about before. I was able to read about the second Doctor, the first Doctor, the third Doctor, stuff that I hadn't seen on television or could barely remember. And when I worked with Terrance on The Ultimate Adventure, I got the chance to script edit him and for him to say, here's the script, let's talk about it. Because obviously it was a stage play, not an audio drama. So things had to change. And we went through all that with him, and actually the opportunity to work with Terrance and actually talk about stuff and his very clear understanding of what Doctor Who is and who the Doctor is was fascinating and was one of those moments which I will cherish forever.
I always delight when ever, someone who can be a creative inspiration is brought up, that every story I ever hear about that person is only ever positive and how wonderful they were. And he seems to have been one of those figures where good luck finding anyone to say a mean thing about him.
You won't, because he was such a collaborator. I think this is why Barry Letts loved working with him so much. And they were able to, it's one of the very few teams where they switched around. So for example, on his classic series, Sunday Night Classic series, it ended up with Barry being the script editor effectively and Terrance being the producer. That's incredibly rare that you can do that. And that's because they had such trust in each other and effectively they worked together so well. And part of that, I'm sure, is because Terrance was so flexible and so lovely to work with. I did work with him prior to that as well, a Doctor Who spin-off video called Shakedown.
I have heard of it. That's one of the things I have not tracked down as yet.
It's great fun, but the script's by Terrance, and it's a very traditional Doctor Who-esque story about Sontarans. And the ending was reasonably straightforward, and I suggested a few changes to it. And Terrance was like, that's brilliant, let's do this and this and this. And I got to see how collaborative he was. And the end result was brilliant. I'm not saying I was brilliant, I'm saying that Terrance, I gave an idea to Terrance, which he ran with much better than I would have done. And, but he just wanted everything to be good. So I think I spent, there was a convention he did before lockdown happened. I spent an evening with Terrance, it's probably 5 years ago now. And it was just lovely to be in his presence. And as you say, you won't find anyone who's got a bad word to say about Terrance.
So we are almost out of time, but I'm going to give you, and no, this has been wonderful. I'm going to give you what I call the free space. So anything that you had hoped I would ask or give you the chance to talk about that I didn't, or anything, you've mentioned the upcoming TV show. I will put information for that in the description, but anything else you feel like plugging or mentioning?
What can I plug and mention? Oh, I've got a new musical going into the West End called Bonnie and Clyde, which opens at the Arts Theatre in April. It was on Broadway 10 years ago, and it's an updated version of it, and hopefully a lot of people will come and see that. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up for the anniversary year with Doctor Who, most of which I can't tell you, obviously. But there's 2 or 3 bits where I'm going, oh, that is ridiculous. And I'm so excited about. It's so weird because we've already planned 23, 24, 25, 26. We're on to a lot of 27 right now. And as I said, we get over enthusiastic about this stuff, and we go, great, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this, and we run ahead of ourselves. So, but we have got some very special things for the anniversary year. So, in the words of JNT, stay tuned.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much.
I just want to thank Jason one more time for sitting down and talking to me. I had a wonderful time speaking with him now multiple times. It's been a joy to do. And I hope that all of you folks enjoyed the results, found it interesting, insightful, a way to pass an hour, whatever works. I am able to do this as my living and work with schedules from people in completely different time zones than me because I don't have to hold down a day job. And that is maintained by the fact that Patreon is what supports me and my ability to do this. Any amount you're able to contribute there is of immense help. If you can't, the like, share, subscribe, that all helps me out. You can check out other projects that I have on other sites, books I've written, etc., etc. But don't worry too much about that. The main thing that I really need you to remember is you're beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings, occasionally even with guests. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And credits. I got to shout out my top Patreon supporters, so thank you very much to Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, Oliver B, Melinda Walters, Leotha Boyd, TT, Bernabulax the Poodle, Eidolon, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Angry Caspero, Adam Lefty Taylor, Shane Ross, Robin Moore, Shayla Gourlay, and Brendan LaRose. Couldn't do it without you.